Welcome, everybody. I'm Eve Samples, Executive Director at Friends of the Everglades, here to talk with you today about Florida's state parks and the threat that is facing them. If you are tuned in to watch us live today or watching us on replay, you're probably one of the tens of thousands of people who raised your voices or showed up to effectively defeat a very concerning proposal to bring harmful development to state parks for now. And I want to thank you for that. I especially want to thank you for staying engaged because our work is not done. And that's what we're going to talk with you about over the next hour. We have an excellent panel of guests who are going to talk about what happened. We just want to refresh your memory. I know it was traumatic. We want to reorient you where the threat stands because it has not gone away. We want to talk about how you can remain vigilant and what we're going to do to help you do that. And we'll answer some questions at the end. We'll talk for about 40 minutes, and then the last 20 minutes will be for Q&A. So if you're watching live on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you can add your questions to the comments, and we'll get to as many of those as possible at the end. So I'll introduce our guests shortly. But first, I just want to say that there are some moments in Florida history that stand out for their lack of transparency by our government, for a disconnect between what the people of Florida want and what our elected leaders and our government agencies, including the very agencies that are supposed to protect our environment, are doing. And this was one of those moments. It showed that even our most closely guarded public lands can be vulnerable to exploitation. That raises a lot of questions about lands that are less closely guarded. And of course, there was a huge silver lining. And the silver lining is that the state park sneak attack, ParksGate, as some are calling it, lit a fire of powerful advocacy in communities all across Florida, even outside of Florida. And those embers are still burning. And I know that's why so many of you are tuned in today. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guests. First, we have Casey Darling-Kniffen, who is Conservation Policy Director at Florida Wildlife Federation. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you. So happy to be here, Eve.
Great to have you. Jessica Namath is an environmental and indigenous rights activist and also former chair of the Village of Tequesta's Environmental Committee. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, guys. Happy to be here.
Thanks. And Ryan is executive director at the Florida Springs Council, representing the North Florida contingent of this battle, because again, it really did stretch the whole peninsula. Welcome, Ryan.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep. So I have so much respect for each of you and your organizations, the expertise you brought, the passion you brought to this fight. So I'm going to turn to Casey first. And Casey, because Florida Wildlife Federation was really at the forefront of this issue, Florida Wildlife Federation was the first to share in detail the very concerning plans for 9 state parks. I'm going to ask you to reorient us, refresh our memories on what was proposed, who was pushing it, and why it was really concerning.
Yeah, so we first learned about the proposals for golf courses on Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And the questions that I set out to answer were, is this even real? Because it was so bad. And number 2, where was this coming from and who was behind it? So that was a big part of what we wanted to make sure we had a full grasp on before we came out with anything to the public. And the picture became, just blatantly clear as the DEP released a press release and spelled out that they indeed were planning, as part of this great outdoors initiative, to put pickleball courts and disc golf and golf courses and lodges into our state parks. So we knew at that point that this was not isolated to Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And then we had the leaked document outlining just exactly what would be going into the 9 state parks around the state. We also quickly learned that the public meetings would be 1 week. We would have 1 week to prepare for those. And that just really alarmed us as it painted the picture that this was to be fast tracked and that public engagement and public input weren't at the forefront of these plans. So our goal at that point was to ensure that we quickly and clearly communicated with people statewide to show up, make their voices heard, to stop these bad plans.
And the whistleblower, James Gaddis, got information out to the public in a manner that allowed us to act quickly. I hate to think what would have happened if those documents had not been leaked. And we know from the documents that were leaked that this originated from the executive office of the governor. So worth noting there. Thank you, Casey, for kind of reorienting us. Jessica, I want to turn to you now. You created a Facebook page dedicated to protecting Jonathan Dickinson State Park. What a remarkable response you got to that page. I think it's almost 50,000 followers now, and it's 3 weeks old. Why do you think this particular threat galvanized the public in such a powerful way?
I've been a 35 plus year resident here in Tequesta, and I immediately was seeing the panic from so many different groups of people. I'm friends with the Club Scrub. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. We've got plant friends. I've got fishermen and hunters. There were so many different walks of life that I think were just so immediately concerned about a park that they loved. And you could see that across the state, as we found out more amendments were coming to light. But just that initial shock of seeing Jonathan Dickinson State Park at risk for having golf courses in it, and seeing the, upset in my community. I know how my community is here, our community here in Tequesta and Jupiter and Hope Sound and Martin County, and how passionate people are about JD. So I, put a page together, and I do think that, again, it was just that support from every walk of life, from however it was that your family engaged with the park, walking, biking, boating. There was just such a diverse group of everybody that cares about it, that it really unified us in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. That was very rewarding. And, for those of us that have been engaged for a while and, trying to get people to see the things that may or may not be happening, seeing everybody without being forced or prodded or poked, just come out of this, just come to the call for action, was amazing. I mean, it was just such an amazing thing to see.
And you ended up using the Facebook group not just as a platform for protecting Jonathan Dickinson, but also for addressing the state parks threat as a whole, which was really effective and helped get a ton of turnout at the state park rallies that ended up happening across the state on, I'm looking at my calendar here, August 20th, right? I'm sorry, Tuesday the 27th.
Yes.
Toward the end of the 8-day period. So we're talking about the period from the 20th to the 28th. The 28th is when the governor backed off. So I'm just going to share a few images here from that a flurry of protests around the state. So this is Oleta River State Park in North Miami Beach, where students showed up to lock arms with some of the protesters. That's an incredible state park along Biscayne Bay with mangrove forests. Anastasia State Park, where a 350-room, they were calling it a lodge, but let's be real, this is a hotel, motel was proposed. Tons of people turned out there. Honeymoon Island State Park also had a very strong turnout on that day, the 28th there, actually. And Jonathan Dickinson State Park. Casey, I know you and I and Jessica were all at this protest on the banks of the St. Lucie River. This was right next to the building where DEP was going to have its public hearing about this park amendment to bring 3 golf courses onto pristine, or at least valuable scrub habitat. And about 350 people showed up. So just wanted to remind everyone what those looked like. I'm sure many of you who are watching were there. And again, we thank you for showing up and turning out.
And just to your point, Eve, I was going to say, I think we quickly realized we couldn't let any of these get through. It was a matter of protecting the whole state, because if one park, if their amendment got through, we know how that works, and it would open the floodgates for potentially letting any through. So it really was a call to action for the entire state.
Yeah, and the collaboration was remarkable. There was recognition by those of us who live near Jonathan Dickinson that it was not acceptable just to protect that park. We weren't going to let the other parks be sacrificial, and the collaboration was very effective. So on that note, I want to turn to Ryan. The state parks threat felt very personal to people. These feel like our backyards in some ways, those of us who are lucky enough to live near them. But there are many other threats to our public lands across Florida, not just state parks. Talk a little bit about the bigger picture here.
Sure. Well, I think, for people who have been following, we remember that under Governor Scott's administration, we had the first proposal to put really incompatible uses on state parks. And there was a big public reaction to that, not nearly as big as what we've seen here, I think, because of the scope. I mean, there was a golf course, of course, proposed last time and some cattle. I think, though, the resorts at Topsail, the resorts at Anastasia, really highlighted just how far from, the purpose of our state parks we have. So, we have these incredible public lands, and I think private interests for a long time have been looking at them and trying to figure out how can we profit off of the good work that the state and the public has done putting these lands into conservation. One of the, I think, scariest proposals we actually saw come up last legislative session, and this has been a priority of Commissioner Wilton Simpson, who worked with a legislator last year to file a bill that would have allowed the Department of Environmental Protection to unilaterally hand over any conservation lands within the Florida Wildlife Corridor and put them into private ownership to be used for intensive agriculture. And of course, while it was the public outreach that really stopped this, and we needed the whistleblower, there were those public meetings, as rigged as they appeared to be. So there was some kind of process that we could engage in. One of the really scary things about what Commissioner Simpson and some of our legislators are proposing is getting rid of the entire process. So allowing DEP to do this completely behind closed doors and take conservation lands that may not be state parks, but we have many valuable conservation lands beyond our state parks. I mean, anybody who's been out and visited our state forests, wildlife management areas, and some of the water management district lands are among the most beautiful and critical in the state. To take those out of forestry, and out of just natural, not forestry, but out of natural forests or forestry, and turn them into intensive agriculture, of course, that would be against the entire principle of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, because those things are no longer good for wildlife. But it would also have enormous impacts on our Florida springs, because agriculture up in Central and North Florida is the #1 source of pollution to our Florida springs. So we need to be crawling back on the amount of intensive agriculture we have in these areas, not expanding it. And of course, we know that those forests and natural lands provide, innumerable ecosystem services besides all the recreational opportunities. So that bill, almost got tacked on to another bill during last session and passed. We were able to work with the sponsor at the last minute, literally, to get him to pull it back. But in doing that, he said, this is going to be back next year. So, while it's, it's really great that we have this massive motion to stop these individual proposals, I think there's a much more broad and systematic attack on our state conservation lands across the board that we have to be vigilant on and, shut that down before it starts.
Yeah, that's really well put. I think there's been a shift in philosophy among our state leadership in viewing public lands as sources of private profit. And just even saying that out loud, it makes no sense. It speaks to the importance of the legislative accountability work that I know Florida Wildlife Federation, Florida Springs Council do right alongside us at Friends of the Everglades. We are playing really hardcore defense every year to try to keep bad bills like the one Brian just talked about from becoming law. So session starts next March. We're going to talk a little bit more about potential legislation on the state parks issue in a minute, but I just wanted to plug that this is important. If you're tuned in now on the state parks issue, please stay tuned in and help us beat back bad bills like this. And Jessica, you and the grassroots community that has really been effective could be so valuable in that. Okay, so I want to turn to Casey now. Let's first give a shout out to the Tampa Bay Times. Max Chesney's reporter there and his colleagues have done remarkable reporting on the state parks assault. They also are doing ongoing reporting on a separate but similarly concerning proposal that would give a developer 324 acres of state forest in exchange for a larger stretch of timberland that is less biodiverse. So again, lack of transparency, a lot of concern. Tell us about that proposal for the Withlacoochee State Forest, Casey.
Yeah, just like you said, the lack of transparency and accountability it just comes to the forefront of this land swap. There was a June 12th cabinet meeting where the Florida Department of Environmental Protection was given the approved authority to go through a number of steps in order to secure this exchange of land. Now, this was added to the agenda last minute. This was not a public, this was not open for public input, and that right there gives us some pause. So where they are now with the Withlacoochee State Forest land swap, we have no idea. We've reached out. We have tried to determine where they were in the process and not gotten any responses. And our partners, conservation partners at the Florida Native Plant Society, have been all over this as well. They have also not received any information about where they were in this stepwise process, where DEP is in securing this land exchange. But one of the steps in this process is for the Florida Forest Service to concur that this exchange is in the public's best interest, and this is a good deal, essentially. And because of the amazing reporting by the Tampa Bay Times and others, we have uncovered some sentiments from the Florida Forest Service that suggest that this isn't a great deal. And we are staying engaged. We sent a letter to Director Dolan from the Florida Forest Service yesterday, and I know our friends at the Florida Native Plant Society did as well. I know that many of us are concerned about this, and it just goes back to having clear communication and transparency around these deals. Many of us are concerned because what is there in the conservation value of each of those parcels has not been communicated with us. So if this is in the public's best interest, please let the public know why and how and what is on both of those parcels, and make this a public process that people can engage in. Just like the state parks folks are very protective and very engaged in that area. People go and recreate there. They have a real love for that state forest land, and they deserve to know all of the facts. And they deserve to be able to weigh in.
It's well put. Thank you. So on August 28th, Governor DeSantis had an unrelated press conference, at the end of which he took questions from the press about the state parks plan. And it was at that press conference when he announced that the plans for the 9 state parks that we were originally talking about should go back to the drawing board. Those were his words, and he indicated these plans would not resurface this year. He did not say the plans were dead. The Jonathan Dickinson State Park golf courses, as we all know, have been revived from death once under then Governor Rick Scott. There was a similar plan, and they came back to life like zombies. So I don't think any of us are resting easy. Jessica, I want to ask you, because you're so tuned into people now, how are you advising that they stay vigilant and watch?
Well, I mean, again, I know that we were getting a lot of congratulations and you've stopped the parks after that press conference. But I mean, I personally was not feeling very reassured. Like you said, I mean, we know this has been like over a decade long pursuance, so to speak. And I don't think any of us want our children that were out there with us to have to fight this battle in the future. So I think, one of the things that's been so incredible are seeing people pay more attention and be more aware of things like a land swap or things that may be going on in their counties, and holding, their representatives, their local government, their county commissioners accountable for those things. And so, the more that we can stay engaged, the more that we can be on top of these issues as they arise and prevent them, of course. But I think that, holding our local government and our commissioners accountable for what their position is and having them voice their opposition and, really put into a letter or make a statement about what they are going to do when the next legislative session comes around. I think all of those things help in the meantime until we hear back from the parks issue or until we find out when ARC will be having the Withlacoochee on their agenda. It helps people learn the process and learn how to navigate agendas and find things online, because as we know, unfortunately, the government doesn't make that very easy. So it would be very nice if they were transparent and forthright and gave us a step-by-step procedure to follow, but it just does not seem to be the case. And again, I think that many of us would have been fine letting our governor act like he did not know about any of these things and say, but I am so sorry. I hear you folks. This is never going to rear its ugly head again, and we are taking these off of any agenda forever. This is not coming back under my watch, kind of a thing. But that's not what we heard. We heard very dismissive remarks and not a lot of information. We didn't know if it left the door open for somebody else to come into Jonathan Dickinson and pick up where Folds of Honor left off. So there were more questions than answers for a lot of us at the end of this. And I think, the public recognized that, and we're not happy with the answers we did get. So I think, I've been encouraging people again, and on the page that we have, I have been trying to help spread state forest issues, state park issues, concerns that we have, because I do think, again, those are learning experiences in the meantime of learning how to get engaged and care and show up at meetings, and what we can do to really voice ourselves and let our representatives and our government officials know how we feel to stop these things, because we've seen that we're able to. It is just a matter of unifying and staying vigilant.
You mentioned Folds of Honor. So for folks who may have forgotten or didn't know, I just want to mention that is a nonprofit that was shopping the Jonathan Dickinson State Park golf courses proposal around to lawmakers and others, and would have had a partnership with the state to receive some support as a result of revenue from those golf courses. Tuskegee Dunes was actually an affiliate, I guess we can call it, of Folds of Honor. All of this this partnership that was envisioned was happening behind closed doors, again, until this all came to light rather quickly. And Jessica, you made a great point. You put it so well about how the governor could have said, this won't come back under my watch. And not only did he not say that, in the days right before his press conference, his spokesperson was defending these plans. So I want to turn to Ryan and Casey now and ask you for your read on where the state parks development proposals stand now. How are you looking at what the governor said and where it is? I'll start with you, Ryan.
Well, I mean, they've been put on pause, right? And I think that one of the hard things about being a conservationist is we have to win every time, right? The developers only have to win once. So, every time a piece of property that shouldn't be developed, whether that be a state park with a golf course or a resort, or a gas station over a cave near Wakulla, or a hotel on the Rainbow River, we have to go and make sure that those are defeated every single time. And that really speaks to the need for rules and laws that prevent these things from happening. So we don't have to be on defense all the time, because whether it's this exact proposal or another proposal, they're going to keep trying to find ways to commercially exploit our public lands, the same way they've successfully exploited our waters in a lot of ways, as long as they can. We have to make sure that the rules and the people that we put into the important positions in government, want to do their job. It's the Department of Environmental Protection, and I haven't seen them protect anything in the environment in the last 6 or 7 years. So, it's really time that we switch that and we make sure that our environmental agencies are doing their job. And that's not going to happen without the amazing public accountability that we're seeing people hold them to. So, with this issue, it was actually none of the state parks in jeopardy here were spring state parks. So some people were questioning, why is the Florida Springs Council involved? And then, of course, last week we find out that there were spring state parks that would have been coming next, right? Silver Springs as the next level. So, we can't be environmental NIMBYs on this. We all need to get engaged everywhere that we can, because no one of our groups can alone fight DEP and the governor and the developers and corporate ag. But when we all come together, we can overwhelm all of them and shut anything down. So I think, we have to keep that pressure up, because if we don't do that, these things will come back in more and more nefarious ways.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Casey, what's your read on where we stand?
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with Ryan. I think you know, if they would have taken a different approach and said these were off the table completely, we could, you know, have some sort of semblance of safety for our public lands and our state parks. However, what we've discovered is that it wasn't just these 9. There was a whole list of a total of 26 state parks that were once slated to have some sort of incompatible use. So thankfully, we had the entire state, you know, up in arms and reaching out about this, even if their backyard state park wasn't on the list, because they could, you know, you could see that if this is going to happen at Jonathan Dickinson or at Topsail or at Anastasia Island State Park, this could happen anywhere in the state. And then, you know, we can take that a step further and say if they're willing to do this on state parks that Floridians just hold so dear, then how about our wildlife management areas? How about our, like you said, our water management district lands, all of our other public lands that, you know, I will remind our audience are paid for by public tax dollars. They belong to us, and we should have a say in what goes on there. So yeah, I am not resting easy that these will not come back. I would hope that if this returns next year, that we have just as strong of a voice as we did when this first came out. And I thank all of our conservation partners and Jessica for keeping everyone engaged, because that is what will end up defeating bad plans like this and any that come in the future.
I feel optimistic about that. I think people are going to state parks more in the aftermath of this. I was out at Jonathan Dickinson yesterday, and you feel a deeper connection when you realize they're at risk. So I do feel optimistic that can happen. Okay, so let's talk about prevention a little bit more. Ryan, do you think there's a way to improve Florida state law to prevent this kind of sneak attack on state parks or other public lands from happening again? So you're nodding. Tell me what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's one of the things about Florida is we have the same legislative calendar as South Dakota, even though we're very, very different states. So for folks who don't know, the Florida legislature only meets for 2 months out of the year. You know, there's some meetings that lead up to that, but there's only 2 months when you can pass legislation. For our next legislative session does not start until March of 2025. But if we want to stop things like this from happening again, that's really going to be the best place to do it. And, you know, as you've said, I think we're usually on defense up in Tallahassee. I spend way more time than I would like lobbying, but defense isn't good enough, right? You know, when you're winning, then you can just play defense. But our environment is losing and has been losing for a long time. And unfortunately, when we had the opportunity to play defense, folks didn't do a good job of it. So now we have to be on offense. And I think this is really one of those opportunities where we can go on offense. I mean, directly because of the incredible public outreach, we saw most of our powerful legislators and political leaders come out in opposition to the state park proposal and stress the importance of protecting parks and conservation lands. You know, I've never seen that kind of reaction before. You know, for so many conservative legislators to go against a proposal by the DeSantis administration is really unique, because he's had a very strong grip on the legislature during his tenure. So all these folks are now on the record, and we need to take advantage of that by getting them to pass legislation that would make these kind of proposals impossible, right? You know, when you read the state park statutes now, you can tell that they were written by people who could never even dream that someone would think about putting a golf course or think about putting a massive resort on our state parks. You know, they're full of good, flowery language, you know, written by people who intended to do well and thought their predecessors would do the same. Unfortunately, that hasn't come to be. So now we need to change those statutes to really lock them down, to say that you're not going to have incompatible uses that affect ecosystems, uses that affect the reason that we preserve our state parks in the first place. And then secondly, we need to make sure that we have legislation that says when we buy something and put it into public conservation land, it will stay in public conservation land. There's the split oak example, there's the Withlacoochee State Forest thing that we're seeing now, but more and more the idea of perpetual. Our conservation lands are supposed to be perpetual, and I think the folks in Tallahassee have forgotten what the word perpetual means. It means forever. It doesn't mean until a developer or intensive agriculture or somebody else comes around and says, I can make money off this. So, we need to make sure that we lock down state statutes so that we don't have to fight these fights every time someone has a bad idea, but the laws prevent them outright. And if someone tries to do it, we can go to court to stop them.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Casey, I know you've been in conversations about legislation to address this. What are your thoughts on moving forward?
Yeah, Ryan's completely right. We have legislation that is, in statute right now that you can go to and say, this is clearly out of compliance with state statute. How could this ever happen? So clearly we need to be very explicit within the statutes on what is allowed and what is not. We can't leave it up to interpretation anymore. We need to have these things, as Ryan said, locked down and spell out exactly what needs to be allowed in our state parks to preserve these ecosystems in the natural domain of Florida. For those of us who maybe live in places that Florida really doesn't look like Florida used to, these places are our only semblance of that. They're the only places to reconnect to that amazing landscape. So it needs to be explicit in those statutes. And then going back to, I'm going to sound like a broken record for our audience, but going back to that transparency and accountability, making sure that the law is followed by our legislators, by our governor, by our agencies. What we have in law many times is good, and it just needs to be followed.
Yeah. Thanks, Casey. So everyone, mark your calendars for March 4th, 2025. That's the first day of legislative session. There will be committee meetings in the weeks and months leading up to that. Sign up for our emails. Go to the Protect Jonathan Dickinson State Park Facebook group. We'll keep you posted as these things start flying. Jessica, any other advice? I mean, you've served on a local government committee. How can everyday people keep track of this stuff and be effective?
And that's what, as I'm listening to, it's frustrating for, I'm sure many in the public like me that are sitting, listening, going, okay, so if we've got good legislation and we have things in there, why did this happen? And I think, again, transparency, of course, keeps coming back up, but the way there is a loss of trust, unfortunately, I think with a lot of our elected officials right now. And I think the way we've seen them twist definitions, like how you brought up lodge before, or recreation, or public access, or some of these words we've all been learning about throughout this experience, and finding out that there is a way, unfortunately, for people that are not maybe well-meaning or trying to protect the things we want them to twist and turn and to find, loopholes. And I think, again, it comes down to voting and to, making sure we're holding people accountable for the things that they have done to us, throughout this experience, which has been very enlightening for, all of the bipartisan supporters, of parks, the bipartisan parks and forest and wild Florida lovers, So I think, again, you have people very frustrated by people that they might have trusted lying to them. And so, as we do approach March 4th, I think we also need to be very open-minded and remembering that some of the people that may or may not have been coming to save us with bills or things like that, we need to make sure we're following to see who is up for reelection before we hang our hats on people, and know that they have a process still to go through in order to get into the position where they might be able to sponsor a bill. So, I think it's just, again, important to follow our intuition here and stay vigilant and pay attention to those of us that I think have been trying to fight alongside the public, as opposed to necessarily trusting people that we've thought we could trust in the past, Yeah,
well put. Yes, there are lawmakers who we would not consider traditional environmental advocates, wanting to get involved in this, wanting to advance legislation. And I think, Ryan, both you and Casey have talked about having the best possible legislation get into the hands of the most effective lawmakers to advance it. So that makes perfect sense. And it's what I think we'll all be pulling for. Okay, I have one more question for the group, but I just want to remind our audience, I know we're getting a ton of comments already. We will take questions the last 20 minutes or so here. So I'm going to float this last question to the whole group, and then we'll turn to Q&A. So this question is about accessibility. It was so interesting that the so-called Great Outdoors Initiative advanced by the Executive Office of the Governor to develop these 9 state parks, that it was rolled out under the guise of increased accessibility, And it's very hard to fathom how a golf course could be more accessible than a hiking trail or lookout tower where you don't need any expensive gear or clothing, or don't have to pay greens fees, but nonetheless, that's how it was rolled out. So I want to ask all 3 of you for your thoughts on how we can truly make state parks more accessible. So I will start with you, Casey.
Yeah, accessibility is so important. Like I said, in some places in Florida, these are the only spaces where you can go out and be surrounded by forests or surrounded by nature. And so increasing accessibility for everyone means things like trail maintenance, making the trails wide enough so that everyone, even people that are limited in their mobility, can access these trails, fixing things that we know have that allow people to experience trails or waterways. I'm thinking of boardwalks that have been closed after being dilapidated. We know how wood structures age in Florida. Those things need maintenance. They need regular maintenance. Park staff know it. They've put it into their management plans. These are the types of things that need to be funded and need to have the regular upkeep that was planned out before we start adding any other amenities that Floridians really don't want. And if you want to know how to increase accessibility, the best thing to do is to ask the people that are trying to access these places. So I'm a big fan of, asking people and listening to them.
Me too. Thanks, Casey. All right, Ryan, how can we increase accessibility at state parks?
I mean, I think Casey nailed it. I've been to about 90% of Florida state parks, and accessibility has never really been an issue except for where they've let things fall into disrepair, where the boardwalks, the observation towers. So when it comes to improvements, they should be improvements that highlight the ecosystem, values and the unique places that we're trying to protect, right? Like there's some places where a lookout tower is a really great thing. I think there's quite a few lookout towers in state parks that have just gone into complete disrepair. Those things need to be fixed. There are trail maintenance, right? There's some places we could use some additional kayak launches, and to do a little better work of developing the kayak launches so that we're not doing damage to the banks and the shores around them. But accessibility needs to be limited to what's necessary to enjoy the natural environment. That's it. Anything beyond that is development, and we don't need development in our state parks.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Jessica, what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I continue going back to the frustration that I feel we've had elected officials twisting these words to mislead those of us in the public to think that accessibility are all of the things that we're saying it's not, So learning again that a tower might have fallen into disrepair as part of a potential reason that somebody might want to use to build a golf course or to lead us to believe we might need one. I think that our park staff are wonderful resources of information, and being able to ask them questions about how they feel, we might improve accessibility within their parks or forests or lands is helpful. But again, I think that for us, it's just being able to access these places, like we're all saying, and just understanding that accessibility is not what we've kind of been told or led to believe, unfortunately, in this recent month here by our government. It's not about making new things accessible to new groups of people, because you see how many of us already enjoy these beautiful spaces. It's maintaining them and maintaining their accessibility, So I'm hopeful that the public has picked up on that. I think that it's been a big learning process for everybody, but I think holding our elected officials accountable for these words like accessibility, now that we know what they mean, and staying on top of them to stay true to that is important.
Agree. I'll just chime in because I grew up not far from Oleta River State Park in North Miami. More free days at state parks, admission-free days, could be a great way to improve accessibility. There's quite a bit of poverty in the North Miami area, so open up these parks, waive admission, maybe have more opportunities where folks who haven't been on a kayak before, or maybe can't afford to buy one or rent one, can get on a kayak. There are a lot of ways to improve accessibility that are not destructive of the ecosystem. So thank you guys for sharing your thoughts on that. All right, I know we have a ton of questions, so we're going to open it up for Q&A now. Allie Hartman, our communications director, is behind the scenes, and she's going to pop some questions in here. So we have a question from Donna, who asks, who exactly are the people behind all of this? Same developer for all of the parks or different ones? Casey, do you want to take a first stab at that? And I'm happy to chime in if necessary.
Sure. Yeah. So, if I think we will have more of this story unfold as the great reporting throughout the state continues to dig through public records requests and files. But as we know right now, from the leaked document that James Gaddis circulated, thankfully, and gave us the opportunity to know who was behind this, it came from the office of the governor, and that was spelled out in that document. And every point that was made in that document did come to pass. The DEP did schedule the meetings, like it said. They did have the exact proposals that you laid out. So we have every reason to believe that that is accurate information. So we know that it came from the governor. Now, who it came from before the governor proposed these things is the question. We know that for Jonathan Dickinson, there was a nonprofit, Folds of Honor, that was involved. And Tuskegee Dunes Foundation was tangentially involved as well, still uncovering those connections. They have withdrawn, but developers for the other park proposals have not been uncovered or made public. So again, I think it was said already, I think Jessica said it, we were left with more questions than answers in many of these instances.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jessica, please.
I was just going to say, though, at the same time, I think that it would be, remiss of us to look past the previous proposals and to look past the people that have been pursuing golf trails throughout the state that have connections to all of these groups. I know that I'd read an article where the gentleman that owns Cabot talks about having grown up here playing in Seminole and in Lost Tree, but then also states clearly he had nothing to do with this. But that leads us all back to, well, then, can we have a little transparency, and can people take some accountability for choices that they may have been supporting that they want to recognize as bad ideas? So, I think that this has come up for quite a while by a lot of the same players here, no pun intended. But I think that, we need to hear some people take accountability and responsibility for their actions. The same thing we teach our children. It's like the public would like some answers.
Yeah, that's important. So let's name names here. Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods were both involved in the proposal at Jonathan Dickinson, according to reporting from multiple media outlets. Jack Nicklaus was also involved in the proposal to bring golf courses to Jonathan Dickinson a decade or so ago. So, they're Florida residents. Sorry, what's that?
I was just going to say, and we know Greg Norman had a proposal for Topsail Preserve back when
Right.
Jack was proposing it under the Rick Scott administration. So,
Right.
We have
Right.
some big names that have been trying. And, again, you can see other courses, that I believe I saw somebody sent me a video of a course that Tiger had developed in Missouri, maybe. And it was shocking to see, what they were willing to do to, carve through limestone, just to create this course in a natural area. And I don't know, it could have been a privately owned space. But again, you have people that are in this development game that talk about using prime real estate or using the best land and trying to make it seem like it can be compatible with natural areas and for public enjoyment, which, we're not interested in. So,
yeah. And nothing against golfers. I'm married to a golfer. They're great. Don't want golf courses built on our state parks. So
we've got a lot of
this. Tiger and Greg Norman, please take note. All right, we'll take our next question. Okay, a question from Elle, we'll call her. Don't the residents of Florida own the state parks through our tax dollars? I like that question. Ryan, why don't you take a crack at that?
The state owns the state parks. So, we do buy them, and the state kind of holds conservation lands in trust for us, as a way to think about it, just like you might have a financial trust for a child or something. So, if we own them, then they could be developed by us. So, it's kind of supposed to be the protection that the state, owns them, because the state is supposed to follow the law, and the law should prevent things like this from happening. And as we said earlier, we need to tighten that up. But it's really the state that owns them on our behalf.
Good, clear answer. Thank you. We'll take the next question. Lori asks, are there email lists and or text message lists we can join for updates / ways to support? Yes. So I'll just say quickly, and then you guys can chime in. Go to Florida Wildlife Federation, sign up for their newsletter. Go to Florida Springs Council, sign up for their newsletter. I know many forums now have an option to get mobile alerts too. We at Friends of the Everglades have both also at everglades.org. Jessica's Facebook group is a great place with updates. In fact, I was on it earlier today. That's still a very active group, Protect Jonathan Dickinson State Park. What did I miss? Anything from the state, DEP?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I know that I've talked about with other groups is a way of kind of creating, whether it's a document or a place where people can access that information more easily, because, whether it's checking on Thursdays for ARC alerts for these amendments that may pop up, or whether it's setting alerts for things, I think that this, like you said, has it only been 3 weeks? But I think that, we're all kind of getting our footing here too, to make sure that we make this information as accessible as possible. So I know, like on my end, I would certainly be sharing any of the things that your groups or organizations would put together for people to be able to find those things more eily. So that's a work in progress also, I would say.
And Florida has great public records laws. When they're complied with.
Yeah.
So, anyone, you don't have to work for Friends of the Everglades or any group to submit a public records request or a media outlet. You can send a public records request to your government leaders and expect a reply. You're entitled to a reply. Okay, we'll take the next question. Ruby asks, can we amend the state constitution? Okay, there's a lot of directions we could go with this. I'll just add that the Florida Right to Clean Water Amendment, those folks who are organizing that effort are currently collecting signatures on petitions. They have to get to 900,000, and that would create an enforceable fundamental right to clean and healthy water and authorize a person to sue when that is not complied with, sue for relief. So that's one option. That would be on the 2026 ballot if enough signatures are collected. What else, guys?
I think that's a great option, Eve. I think, all of these proposals had the potential to impact our water supply and water quality through runoff, through consumptive use. And that's something that I know the Florida Springs Council has been engaged in for many, many years. And so I think having that fundamental right to clean and healthy waters would be a great protection that we could have as a state to ensure that we have some sort of recourse if these things do happen.
You can go to FloridaRightToCleanWater.org to get a petition. Our offices at Friends of the Everglades in Stewart are also a petition drop-off point if you want to sign one here. Okay, we'll take the next question. Allison asks, if they're breaking state statutes, can't we sue? I'll turn to Ryan again on this one.
Right. Well, Yes, you can sue if someone's breaking a state statute. The Florida Springs Council probably brings more litigation for our size than anybody else in Florida. It is very hard. Very, very hard, very, very expensive. We beat the state for violating water quality laws. That is now we've won in the First District Court of Appeals, but we're still fighting 6 years later to get that ruling to actually be followed by DEP. But the laws aren't strong enough now. There's enough wiggle room. Again, I don't think the folks who wrote them ever envisioned a proposal. So they're full of great language, but that kind of says we need things to increase accessibility. We need recreational opportunities. Well, if increasing accessibility is trails and recreational opportunities are kayaking, we're all good. But as soon as you start redefining those terms, and none of those terms are defined in statute right now, which is what one of the big problems is, it becomes very slippery. So we've seen a lot of folks in the past lose litigation that looked like it was going to go. It's better to shore up the laws to make sure that when you go litigate, that you have an ironclad case, because it is so hard and so expensive. So I think right now, that's where we're at. We need to shore up those laws so that the litigation would definitely be successful in the future if it had to come to it.
And unfortunately, people power won the first round, so we don't have to sue right now. And if the people stay engaged, I think we could avoid that potential necessity while we shore up state law. Okay, we'll take the next question. Nadine asks, what can we, the general public, do to get better laws in place to protect state parks and preserves? Similar question. Jessica, why don't you jump in on this one?
Yes, and I was also just going to even tie both in. One of the things that our Environmental Advisory Committee here was tasked with doing was reviewing our comprehensive plan and making sure it was up to speed. And you really see how those little words can get twisted, or how one word can make all of the difference. So that being said, I've been encouraging folks to, like I said, to have their local governments really voice clearly where they stand on these issues, and then hold them accountable to changing or revising what they say. And then our county commissioners in all of these different counties, even if there wasn't a park in your county, you could ask them, where do you stand? We know that state parks keep coming up. We're in a very good position here of being able to leverage that. Everybody in this state that is an elected official should be very well aware of what's going on here with our state parks and our forests, and have an idea of how people feel in general about our land and our green space and our preserves and wetlands and protected areas. So it's an opportunity for anybody that's got an area that they care about to really get involved. And this is a great leveraging point. So again, I think making sure that we have, I know the Martin County commissioners, for example, when we were at that meeting, have made a statement in opposition, and I would like to see them include lines of assurance that they will pursue stronger laws in the next legislative session, or, make sure that they're going to do their part. So I think, again, getting involved with your local government, because if we all have eyes on them, that's the best way to kind of prevent these things from hopefully happening in the future. And knowing that we can, like Ryan said, have records on statement, or have statements on record that we can then hold them accountable to.
Great. And as legislation is drafted and filed, positive legislation, we will keep you all informed on ways you can weigh in. I could foresee some both digital advocacy and perhaps in-person advocacy that will be necessary during legislative session in March. So people demonstrated they're willing to show up for this. I don't know if a bus ride to Tallahassee is as appealing.
We were looking forward to it, Eve. We were hoping to. I mean, there were a lot of us. That's why we had that big rally. We wanted that meeting to continue. We didn't want it delayed, because we were ready to go on up to Tallahassee and let them hear how we felt.
Well, then I have total confidence that we will be there.
And I'll just add to that a proactive step is let your elected officials know before legislative session what issues matter to you. They are not going to propose or carry legislation if their constituents are not saying we want this. So that's a great first step. If you have an elected official in your, which we all do, let them know these things matter to me. I care about conservation. I care about water quality. I want to see you represent my cares and concerns when you go up to Tallahassee. That's their job.
That's right. And every county has a legislative delegation that meets in the months before session starts in the local community. This is a great opportunity to show up. Go to your local county commission website, look at their calendar. You can find out when that is in your community.
And even we just, Village of Tequesta had our lobbyist came in and presented to us here. So, again, reaching out just for people, there's somebody that lobbies on behalf of our towns and our counties, and letting, again, our elected officials on every level know what we care about here in our wild spaces, that those need to be pursued and protected.
Okay, we can take another question. Okay, the question is, will this possibly be a fight that will last for years, or could we put it to total rest next year? Ryan?
I mean, to me, this fight is about protecting Florida's lands, waters, and wildlife. And that's going to be a fight that, those of us here will never not have a job as long as we want to continue to do that, because this is Florida. And every piece of land that we don't conserve will be developed. And every one of those developments has a negative impact on our environment. But I do think that we have the ability to, write a bill for this session that will at least put this problem to rest, and at least we can move on to fighting any of the other 4 dozen issues that we have to work on between our collective groups, looking at the Everglades, springs and rivers, and wildlife. But we need to put this one to rest. This has obviously been a terrible idea. And just on the last question, you're going to get emails if you go and you sign up with the Springs Council or Wildlife Federation or Everglades. You're going to get emails asking you to take action during legislative session. And I know back when I first started this, I kind of thought that was probably just a way to get my email address or, some kind of like marketing thing. But as someone who spends a lot of time lobbying in Tallahassee, I can tell you that we really do win battles based on emails and phone calls. It's how we win more of our battles than anything else. I have had legislators dozens of times say that they were taking a position on a bill because they got X thousand emails, or because their phone won't stop ringing and they can't get any business done, or, so when you get those, a lot of us have advocacy systems that make it real easy to email your elected officials or to make phone calls to your elected officials. We were able to really defeat this with, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, but it only takes a few thousand people within 24, 48 hours leading up to a bill to change a legislator's vote. And a lot of committees, we only need to move one legislator to get a bill passed or killed. So, when you get those, please don't pass by them. I promise you there's a real reason for doing it. And it's because we don't have the money that the other side does. We don't get to walk in with the 5-figure, 6-figure checks. We have to show that we have 5 figures and 6 figures of people who behind us when I walk into the office. So, take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, love it. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. Bill asks, how can we prevent them from being even sneakier next time? Oh gosh, imagine the possibilities. Yeah. Casey, do you want to jump in on that?
Oh, that is a hard question. Can we even imagine how much sneakier they can get? I think it really comes down to staying engaged. I'm going to reiterate what Ryan was saying. When we send our emails, we are doing that to make this process the most efficient for our audiences, for you all who have busy lives and have other things going on and don't spend, your entire day researching who the best person to contact and what exactly do I need to say to get my point across and when do I need to do it by. We are all of our organizations are trying to do that legwork to make it efficient for you. Sending emails is amazing, letting them know we're watching, letting them know that we are engaged in this process and what we want. And then on top of that, calling, hearing from you as a person, as a, not some digital bot or something, hearing from you is an amazing way to ensure that our elected officials know that we are going to hold them accountable, that we're not going to fall asleep at the wheel on this. So I would say that's the best shot that we have. It's kind of like a race who's going to get Are they going to get sneakier and then we have to get louder? And hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we get loud enough that they know that we're paying attention.
Yeah, I'll just add, and then I'll turn to you, Jessica. You have to be very skeptical, venturing into cynicism. But the good news is when you get out into state parks, that's like the antidote. So you're not going to be, forever more cynical. So Jessica.
I was just going to say, go to meetings too. If you haven't been to local meetings and to your county meetings, go sit in on those and listen and see what's going on. Because I know that people that come for the first time are often like, whoa, that's how quickly these things happen. This is what they're talking about. This is how the decisions are made. So I think that, again, and I know like in Tequesta, if you're not reading it into the record, a lot of times they don't have it on record. So, the more eyes on the voters that are making the choices when they're making them, I tend to think also the better. So just engagement, of course, doing all of the engagement on a state level and through these action items that we're given, but also boots on the ground here, local folks. I mean, look what we were able to do when we all joined together. So the more involved you can be in your local communities, I think the better,
Yeah.
And,
Good, Ron.
there needs to be consequences too. I think that's one thing that we have not seen here is the consequences, right? The only person who got fired over this was the guy who blew the whistle and raised the alarm, right? It should have been Secretary Hamilton or whoever, allowed this to go forward at DEP. The governor has to be voted out. He can't be fired, but anyone at DEP can be fired. And, it's not their job just to blindly listen to terrible ideas that come from the governor's office, right? It's their job to protect the environment. So I think it tells you a lot when you look at who's been held responsible and who hasn't. And we need to ensure that the people who can be held responsible now are.
Agreed.
Yeah, great point. And we're nonprofits. We can't engage in elections. We have a sister organization, Vote Water, that can. Go check out Vote Water, see what you can do on the political side of things, because accountability is absolutely necessary and often political solutions are required. So I know we didn't get to so many questions, but we are at an hour, and I will commit to keeping everyone informed. I know Florida Wildlife Federation, Florida Springs Council, Jessica, you personally, and in the Facebook group will be keeping folks informed. Let us know if you'd like us to do another one of these, if it was helpful. And I just can't thank the three of you enough. I have so much respect for you personally and for the groups that you represent. Thank you for sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.